Good morning. I would like to call the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Ed, CIP, to order. Welcome to everyone joining us in the committee room here in Carson City. We do not have our feed to Las Vegas right this minute, so we will join those listening online. And this is the first committee meeting of our joint subcommittee of the Money Committees this session. I am Senator Marilyn Dondero Loop, and I will be chairing the joint subcommittee meeting today. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Assemblymember Howdegi. Here. Assemblymember Hafen. Here. Assemblymember Koenig. Here. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno. Here. Assemblymember Neal. Here. O'Neill. I'm sorry. Assemblymember Torres Fawcett. Here. Assemblymember Yeager. Here. Senator Buck. Here. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Neal. Here. Senator Stone. Assemblymember Backus. Present. Chair Dondero Loop.
Here, and please mark Senator Cannizzaro present as she arrives. Before we move on to today's budget hearing, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. Please, committee members and members of the public, mute your electronic devices. And second, please, for those providing testimony today, state your name for the record. And if you have a business card, please hand that to the secretary. This meeting presently is not being video conferenced, but it is online, so please make sure you speak clearly. Today, we only have one budget on the agenda for a hearing, and that is Budget Account 2711. That is the State Public Charter School Authority. I would like to welcome Melissa McAdon, and Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority, and anyone she's brought with her. Good morning. Go ahead and start, and we will open the hearing on Budget Account 2711, and please go ahead when you are ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Melissa McAdon. I'm the Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority, and with me today I have a familiar face to some of you, Jennifer Bauer, Director of Finance and Operations. Before we dive into the specific budget request, we believe it is important to lay some context regarding the SPCSA. As you may know, the SPCSA was created in 2011 to authorize high-quality public charter schools, provide oversight to those schools once they have been approved, and serve as a model of best practice for other charter school authorizers. The vision of the SPCSA is equitable access to diverse, innovative, and high-quality public schools for every Nevada student. Our mission is to sponsor, support, and oversee dynamic and responsive public charter schools that prepare all students for academic, social, and economic success. This slide shows the rate of charter school growth in our portfolio since 2018. As you can see, the last few years, we have experienced a low percentage of growth. Next year, we anticipate a much higher increase. This significant increase is in large part because we are absorbing 5 charter schools serving almost 6,000 students that were formally authorized by Clark County School District. In addition, we have 5 charter schools that are projected to open in the fall and several schools that are operating on a slow growth model whose enrollment has been approved to increase incrementally year over year. Authorizing and overseeing the schools in our portfolio are key responsibilities of the agency. These responsibilities can be broken into a few key work streams. First, we review various application types and make recommendations to our board, which is the ultimate decision maker. These applications include brand new charter school applications and charter amendments like relocations, expansions, or material changes to the charter contract. We also review renewal applications. As you are likely aware, charter schools have set terms, and when those are up to expire, schools must apply to renew and remain in operation. We also oversee a revolving loan and transportation applications. The second major work stream involves monitoring and evaluating our schools' academic, organizational, and financial performance. We conduct site evaluations at least the first, third, and fifth year of a charter contract. We assess academic performance, monitor contractual, regulatory, and statutory compliance, and evaluate short-term and long-term financial indicators. The third work stream is that of the local education agent, or LEA. In most states, charter schools serve as their own LEA. In Nevada, the SPCSA is the LEA for the schools it authorizes, making us the 18th LEA. The other 17 LEAs are the 17 school districts. Not only is the SPCSA a state agency tasked with authorizing schools, but we are also an LEA, and we have all the legal responsibilities that come along with that designation. When you think about a traditional school district, these are the people working in the central office, the people that oversee programs like special education, Title I, English language learners, grants, and school improvement initiatives, to name a few. Although this slide is dense, I do want to cover it in detail so that the committee understands the scope of all of the LEA legal mandates. The major responsibilities of an LEA can be lumped into 4 buckets, the first of which is to ensure that all students in public schools receive a free, appropriate education. This includes things like academic standards, anti-bullying policies, McKinney-Vento, school safety and security, FERPA, and ESSA. The next bucket is to ensure that special education and related services are provided in sponsored charter schools, ensuring that schools are following IDEA, dealing with due process resolutions, and 504s also fall under this category. The next major bucket of LEA responsibilities is to allocate federal grants to our schools. This means we solicit grants, we review and approve those grants, we work with the Nevada Department of Education on application revisions, we execute subawards, review and approve reimbursement requests, and we work with NDE and the schools to amend those applications. And as part of that, we also finally conduct risk-based monitoring, which means we evaluate each school for risk of noncompliance with grant and program requirements. We monitor the activities of each school for each grant in alignment with risk level, and we support schools in addressing issues as revealed during monitoring. To illustrate current staffing realities at the SPCSA, we can look at the other 2 statewide charter school authorizers in the United States who also serve as the local education agent, the South Carolina Public Charter School District and the Colorado Charter School Institute. Let's look to see how Nevada compares. South Carolina has a student to full-time equivalent ratio of 496 to 1, and Colorado has a ratio of 733 to 1, compared to the SPCSA at 1,768 to 1. Regarding campuses to FTE, South Carolina has 44 campuses and a ratio of 1 to 1. Colorado has 45 campuses and a ratio of 1 to 5, compared to the SPCSA, which has 80 campuses with a ratio of 2.3 to 1. Compared to other authorizers who also serve as the LEA, we are significantly understaffed, making it difficult to fulfill our obligations. In Nevada, the LEA closest to size to the SPCSA is the Washoe County School District. As the LEA, we have the same responsibilities as the other 17 school districts in our state, some of which we just outlined on a previous slide. By making a quick comparison of staffing related to LEA responsibilities, beginning with special education, we see a severe discrepancy in full-time equivalents assigned to support the implementation of the complex federal law IDEA. Washoe County has a ratio of 579 IEP students to 1 FTE. The SPCSA has a ratio of 3,248 students to 1 FTE. Washoe has a ratio of 705 ELL students to 1 FTE. The SPCSA has a ratio of 8,281 to 1. Shifting gears to consider Title I campuses, Washoe has a ratio of 5 Title I campuses to 1 FTE. The SPCSA has a ratio of 53 to 1. Why do these caseloads comparisons matter? Because they affect our ability to support and oversee our schools, which ultimately impacts students. The SPCSA is currently operating from a very reactive place based on risk-based monitoring and parent complaints. We can all agree that providing proactive support to schools around federal policies, IDEA, and MTSS is better for students and families. Proactive support looks like frequent targeted training, on-site monitoring, and desktop monitoring of IEPs, just to name a few. Rather than train schools after they get a formal state complaint, we would prefer to train our schools and monitor them along the way to avoid these situations entirely. As we move through the decision units, you will see that many of our requests are related to these matters. Before we jump into the specifics, I believe it is critical that everyone has a working understanding of our funding at the SPCSA. The SPCSA does not receive general fund appropriations. Rather, we are funded through sponsorship fees. Students of Nevada are funded under the pupil-centered funding plan. If a parent exercises their right to school choice, the base funding follows the child to their charter school. A 1.25% of that base funding is deducted to support the functions of our agency. The expectation in Nevada is that public schools spend the money on the students at the time they are funded. With very few exceptions, we do not want public schools hoarding dollars. We want those dollars to be spent educating and benefiting the students for which they were allocated. Our fee is no different. The SPCSA should only be setting aside reasonable contingency and enough reserve to reimburse our schools on federal grant expenses. The rest of our money should be spent to support our work to benefit the students sitting in seats right now. Funding these positions so the SPCSA can meet its obligations as the authorizer and LEA of a growing portfolio will not affect the general fund or other agencies getting the positions they need or want. With that background, I will transition to talk about the SPCSA budget accounts. We have two budget accounts. 2708 is the Public Charter School Loan Program, and 2711 is the SPCSA operating budget. Budget account 2708 has a total request of approximately $730,000 in year one and $848,000 in year two, with existing loans to 3 schools through the revolving loan program. Applications for a loan can be submitted twice per year for consideration by the authority board. There is a one-shot request for a general fund appropriation to restore the funds swept during the pandemic and increase available cash to provide loans to more schools. In fiscal year 2024, the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation loaned the SPCSA...
Excuse me, can I stop you right now?
Of course.
We aren't agendized to talk about the loans.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let's see, is there anything else on this one? Nope, okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, perfect. Next slide. Budget account 2711 has a total request of approximately $50 million in years 1 and 2. Sponsorship fees fund the agency in the form of a 1.25% deduction from sponsored charter schools' PCFP payments. The budget request includes the M200 decision unit to adjust revenue and expenditure authority for changes in the number of schools and students served. The budget request includes 5 decision units for positions, 2 decision units to remove expiring grants, 1 decision unit to support operations, and 1 decision unit to reclassify the unclassified deputy director position, and finally 1 decision unit to provide for replacement computers. Decision Unit M200 addresses caseload changes. The most recent student counts, charter holders, and campuses are referenced here, as well as projected growth in the biennium. Specifically, we want to highlight the significant increase in 25-26 with the Clark County School District schools coming into our portfolio. This will make us the second largest LEA in the state and substantially increase our workload on both the authorizing and LEA front. Additional increases are based on enrollment caps as approved by the SPCSA board. I will now discuss our enhancement requests, which are divided into 5 decision units and aligned to 2 priorities. The first is our LEA responsibilities. As previously discussed, the growth of charter schools combined with the increase in grant programs has led to more grant applications, awards, amendments, and reimbursement requests. Critically, the increase in student size and special education students specifically has led to more than tripling LEA requirements associated with special education matters in recent years. The rapid growth has led the SPCSA approaching this work reactively rather than proactively, which never is in the best interest of students. Additionally, as LEA, we should be proactively supporting our schools on their school performance plan, multi-tiered systems of support, career and technical education, and infinite campus. Next is authorizing and oversight. The previously mentioned increased caseloads necessitate more complex oversight, timely and differentiated oversight related to finances, operations, and governance, and increased site evaluations. More oversight and manpower is required to maintain the work of our authorizing team. This proposed organization chart represents 16 new positions within 5 enhancement units. The education program, so I'll jump into decision unit E125. The education program director will serve as the director of monitoring and evaluation, overseeing site evaluations and risk-based monitoring. Currently, multiple teams conduct on-site visits to schools for either standard site work or risk-based monitoring associated with federal programs. The work in these teams can be duplicative and burdensome to schools who must host multiple on-site visits in the same school year. Not only is the SPCSA sending out multiple teams, but so do other entities like the Department of Education and the LCB auditing teams. By consolidating this work under the new education program director, we expect to be more efficient and lessen the burden on schools. The first PCN 0502, the first management analyst for position, will play a vital role in the oversight of new and struggling charter schools in the areas of governance and finance. We know there is a direct correlation between good governance and positive academic and financial outcomes. As we authorize more small single-site schools, we see a growing need to monitor both governance and finances on a monthly basis in the first few years of operation. This will allow us to intervene in any concerns early and avoid issues that can lead to closure. Next up is the Management Analyst 2, which is critical to ensuring that charter schools finally become eligible to be reimbursed for Medicaid allowable services. This represents a significant amount of federal funding not leveraged to support schools in providing quality mandated health care. According to the direction, the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy, schools cannot submit claims, our charter schools cannot submit claims directly to their organization's third-party administrator. Instead, schools must submit through their LEA. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the SPCSA to establish a path forward for public charter schools. PCN 0505, the second Analyst 4 position, will supervise the organizational performance framework and ensure that all supervisors overseeing a framework are equitably compensated. By creating this MA4 position, we can move the current MA3 position to the financial framework team, again, creating equity on both teams. PCN 0506, the first education program professional, will be critical in ensuring that charter schools receive support for special education services. As previously mentioned, a similarly sized LEA has 17 people supporting this work, while the SPCSA has 2. Without this position, the SPCSA is not able to proactively support our schools, but rather will remain reactionary. We would like to be positioned to enhance the monitoring of special education programs at our charter schools, to provide technical assistance on the specific challenges faced by our schools, and expand our training opportunities around best practices, innovative strategies, and compliance updates. This position will significantly enhance the quality of special education programming at public charter schools. And lastly, 0508, the second education program professional, will support over 80 campuses in the SPCSA in implementing multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, a core responsibility of all LEAs. A similarly sized LEA has 18 individuals supporting this work. If this position is not approved, we will have 0 people supporting this work. The SPCSA does anticipate a percentage of schools choosing to implement a formal MTSS program will increase over the 25-27 biennium, as MTSS is a research-proven method for increasing student engagement and academic outcomes, improving school climate and culture, decreasing disproportionate discipline practices, and decreasing negative student behavior. The SPCSA has been able to leverage several grants to fund this work, including Project Aware, COVID relief funding, and IDEA. However, all of these grants have or will have ended before October 1st, 2025. The support currently provided to our schools includes comprehensive coaching on effective MTSS methods, an SPCSA-led external evaluation of MTSS systems, and detailed coaching related to the systems of support offered at schools who elect to provide this service. Decision Unit E-126. Our second enhancement decision unit includes a request for 2 positions. The first education program professional will support schools in creating and implementing school performance plans as required by the Nevada Department of Education and the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. This is the responsibility of all LEAs, including the SPCSA. This position will also serve as the main contact for career and technical education. A similarly sized LEA has 9 individuals supporting these CTE efforts. The SPCSA does not have a designated person assigned to either of these important functions. The current EPP responsible for school improvement plans also oversees Title I, Title II, Title IV, McKinney-Vento, and foster care. Each one of those could be a full-time position. By adding this EPP, we can ensure a more proactive approach to these responsibilities. Additionally, without this position, schools will likely miss opportunities to expand their CTE offerings and access additional funding to support their programs. For example, only 2 schools currently access federal Perkins funds to support their CTE programs. As the LEA, for these schools to continue receiving those funds, that we, as the LEA, must help them write the comprehensive local needs assessment. And the next position, the 0511, the Education Program Supervisor, will oversee the site evaluation team. The SPCSA currently anticipates 53 site evaluations in fiscal year 26, including the 6 current CCSD charter schools that transferred sponsorship to the SPCSA, and 75 site evaluations in fiscal year 27. However, more may be added for schools that receive a 1 or 2 star on the Nevada School Performance Framework rating. Additionally, if deficiencies are identified during a site visit, those schools will receive targeted visits in the following school year. Our third enhancement decision unit, E-127, includes a request for 3 positions. The first education program professional in this decision unit will be crucial for ensuring that SPCSA charter schools effectively utilize the Student Information System Infinite Campus. This is particularly important for new schools that may have limited experience with Infinite Campus, which leads to funding inequities. Currently, we do not support our schools with Infinite Campus. A similarly sized LEA has 8 FTE supporting their schools. The student data that goes into Infinite Campus can have significant impacts, particularly related to attendance coding, which affects chronic absenteeism, and the calculation of each student's grad score, which impacts which students are identified for at-risk categorical funding. An SPCSA position dedicated to Infinite Campus will help public charter schools better accurately meet state and federal student information requirements. The second EPP will support the implementation of multi-tiered systems of support. As mentioned in Decision Unit 125, we currently have 2 individuals supporting this work through grant funding. To provide targeted support with implementing MTSS, the recommended ratio by the UNR PBIS Technical Assistance Center is 1 staff member per 4 schools implementing MTSS. To remain at our current level of support for schools, the SPCSA needs approval for both positions, which would still put us at a ratio of 1 staff member per 11.5 schools if no new schools elect to participate. On average, 4.5 new schools request to join an MTSS cohort annually. So if this trend continued this year, we would be operating at a ratio of 1 staff member per 13.8 schools if both positions are approved, which is well above the recommended ratios. Without approval for either position, our schools would have 0 staff members supporting them with MTSS implementation, again, a core responsibility of the LEA. The grants, and then last up is 05112, the Grants and Project Analyst 2 is needed to support grant administration work for the Individuals with Disabilities Act related grants. It is important to note that the agency currently performs this work with a temporary employee assigned through a contracted staff augmentation vendor. Approval of this position would convert the contracted position to a full-time state employee position. This next decision unit, E128, includes a request for 3 positions, all of which would convert current contracted positions to full-time state employee positions. All 3 of these positions are needed to address the increase in grant programs administered by the SPCSA. The Grants Project Analyst will support grant administration work for the Every Student Succeeds Act related grants. The Accounting Assistant 3 will support our grant reimbursement request activities. And finally, the Accounting Assistant 4 will provide final approval of payments to schools and reconcile the agency's budget accounts. Decision Unit E29 includes 2 education program professionals who were approved during the 24-25 interim and are currently working in the agency to support and conduct site evaluations and special education. Decision Unit 816 is seeking to reclass the deputy director to an education program director. The position's current responsibilities, in addition to those that will come with the additional schools and staffing, align more closely to that of an education programs director. The position is not the second in command in the agency. Rather, the position's focus is on most of the program areas in the series concept of the education program director class specifications. The agency needs the position classified similarly to the director of the agency's other 2 teams to ensure the ability to recruit qualified individuals with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to lead the school support team. Decision Unit 490 and 491. These will eliminate and remove authority for grants that are set to wind down during the biennium. Project Aware is a federal grant that the state was awarded to support schools with accessing mental health resources. This position will go away, hoping to incorporate it into one of the MTSS positions that we are requesting. Our final enhancement request is for computer replacement in accordance with the state's replacement schedule. In summary, we are seeking authorization to add positions funded through agency reserves with the intent to service the students and schools for which those funds were intended and to meet our obligations as the state agency and the state's second largest LEA. The agency can continue to self-fund these positions in the long term through sponsorship fees while maintaining the necessary level of reserves. We are committed to maintaining quality and efficiency as an agency and providing the support required of an LEA. And with that, we will stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your presentation. I believe we do have questions, and we will start with Assemblymember Hadagi.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here and for your presentation. I want to just start with your operating reserve levels. You had said something during your presentation about not hoarding dollars and making sure those dollars are getting to students. And so we had this conversation last session, too, about how large your reserves were, right? And bringing those back down to the 105-day reserve level. So can you walk us through what you're going to do during this biennium to meet your targeted reserve level of 105 days? Because from the notes that we received, if all the GovRec decisions are made, you're still going to have 183 days and 179 days of reserves, which is more than the 105. So can you walk us through what the plan is to bring those down to 105?
Absolutely. I'll start, Melissa McAdam for the record, I'll start, and then I'll let Jennifer Bauer add on to that. Essentially, I think the committee understands that when our charter schools submit for reimbursement for grants, a lot of them are small schools and kind of cash flow is king. So we don't wait for NDE to reimburse them. We hold enough reserve so that we can reimburse our schools immediately. And when we were, and that's about $50 million in federal grants, we built up our reserves to the levels they were when we had all the federal relief funds associated with ESSA, because it like doubled that amount. So the amount of reserves we had were really important so that we could reimburse our schools. Now that those are out of the way and pretty much done, we do have a plan that builds on past practice of reimbursing our schools. And I will let Jennifer Bauer talk about how that process will work this coming year.
Thank you, Executive Director McAdam. Jennifer Bauer, Director of Finance and Operations for the record. Assemblymember Hadagi, you are correct. We did have this discussion. Thank you for bringing it up. We did need the large reserves to get us through the COVID relief funds to ensure that we had sufficient cash on hand to reimburse schools through that. As Executive Director Melissa McAdam indicated, we're past that now. So we do have a plan, and it was submitted for the committee's consideration in the January meeting of the Interim Finance Committee to bring down reserves. What we are looking at doing is, first and foremost, we are going to be presenting a request in the April Interim Finance Committee meeting for reserve authority to be transferred to address budget shortfalls. We have some budget shortfalls in salaries and operating that we need to address this interim. And then secondly, we're going to be looking at the impact of this legislative body's decision on our FY26-27 budget and what that does to the reserve level. And then finally, once we take all those calculations into account, we're going to look at the reserve level as it stands after those decisions are made and how we can bring them down to the 105 days. And that difference is what I'm going to use to calculate the refund to charter schools. And we will do that in concert with NDE as a part of the Pupil Center funding plan. And it will be realized in the form of an increased Pupil Center funding plan payment at the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the follow-up. And then in order to get those reserve levels up to cover the federal grants ahead of time, did you guys increase the sponsorship rate, or has it always been 1.25%? And if you increased it, are you planning to decrease it?
Jennifer Bauer for the record again. We did not increase our fees. In fact, we actually, in the 2019 session, I believe it was, decreased our sponsorship fee. Prior to the 2019 legislative session, we were at 1.5%. We decreased to 1.25%, and we have not increased our fees. Those were just the realized additional revenue brought in by not having the expenditures to balance that additional revenue from the increase in students in our portfolio.
Melissa Mackin, for the record, if I could just add one additional point to that. Historically, the agency has struggled, in spite of having, the funding, to get the positions approved that we needed to fulfill our role, especially in the area of LEA. And so, while we knew we needed the money to fund the positions to meet our responsibilities, but we historically have struggled to get those positions approved, which we feel like, as the state has become more sophisticated and everybody understands, how the charter space works and the role of the LEA, we do believe those days are behind us, and that in general people understand those LEA responsibilities. So we don't think that'll be a problem going forward, and we think that fee is actually right where it needs to be to fulfill our legal responsibilities.
And then just the last question, just to follow up on that. Is there a process you follow? Do you guys evaluate the sponsorship fee every year, or is it, what's the process? Because, as more and more charter schools come into the picture, as you guys grow, it seems like I think that's why you guys dropped the fee in 2019, because there was more schools now. And so what's the process for evaluating how that fee is set?
Melissa Mackin, for the record, thank you for that question, Assembly Member. We do analyze it every year, and we base it, on our needs to fulfill our obligations as LEA and authorizer, and what positions we need and how much that's going to cost us.
Thank you very much. And I believe Assemblymember Backus has a
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I have two questions on some of the budget enhancement requests, and then I had a kind of a question on the slides, if that's okay, Madam Chair. First, I'll go to, let me go to the slides first, because that will kind of tee up where we're going. But just looking at, for example, slides 8 and 9, as well as some of the other slides you had shown today to kind of demonstrate the ratios of one, like how many students to FTE, or how many, or to FTE and of the charter school authority, as well as the schools to workers, and looking at across the board. I was just curious, when you pull that data for the student counts, when do you pull that data? Is it a successful completion of 1 year for that one student, or is it simply utilizing the information from count day?
Melissa Mackin, for the record, thank you for that question, Assembly Member. It is just that count day data.
And so I take it that's the October 1st count day data? Correct. Okay. Then moving on to the request, the budget request for PCN 501, where you're seeking the Education Programs Director position. How would this new, and I know you kind of gave some details and I appreciate that, but I would hope that you can elaborate how this new Education Programs Director position would address inefficiencies in the authority's site evaluation and monitoring processes.
Sure. Melissa Mackin, for the record, that's a great question, and it is kind of confusing. So essentially, right now, within the SPCSA, we have two separate teams doing two separate site visits. We have the authorizing team over here doing the site visits that happen on the first, third, and fifth year. And then over here, we have the risk-based monitoring team who is, doing the federally required monitoring associated with federal grants. Many of their processes are the same, right? They're collecting data in advance. They're talking to schools in advance. There's a lot of back and forth communication with the school to get set up. And then most importantly, they're both going on site to conduct a site visit that sometimes is looking at the same information. Well, obviously, that's really burdensome on schools. And so what we're hoping is that with this position, we would have a dedicated person who could actually dig in and do the analysis required of, okay, what is risk-based monitoring required to do? What is site evaluation required to do? Where is there overlap? Where is there redundancy? How can we be more efficient for our sake and the sake of the schools? And without that position, we just don't have anyone to like dig in, do the analysis, and then pull together the work of all of those different teams into sort of one efficient school visit.
Thank you for that. And then my next question pertains to, and I know you had a variety of these, but the management analysis position where we're going from the one that was granted in 2023, that was the grade 33, that's now being sought to be moved to a grade 39 position. And my question is, if a higher grade management analysis position is needed to perform complex work, can you explain why the existing management analysis position could not be reclassified instead of adding this new position?
Melissa Macadin, for the record, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. So the management analyst one position was hired to work specifically as we got more and more schools, there's more and more reports, right? We collect approximately 190 reports from every charter school. So each one of those reports has to be reviewed and approved. So she was really, or that individual was brought on to help with just the sheer volume of reports that had to be reviewed and approved. This position is wholly different than that. It is going to look specifically at new charter schools and focus in on their governance and their finance. So it requires a level of expertise that a management analyst one just wouldn't have. They would need to be able to, as this body knows, we were required to establish governance standards, and we recognize that there is a direct link between good governance and student outcomes. So this individual would be monitoring how these charter school boards are operating, and equally as important, how their finances are going. And they have to have a level of expertise, for example, to understand, for example, what are the long-term financial implications of this building you're about to buy or this lease you're about to sign, right? If this building has a balloon payment in 8 years that's based on some massive enrollment, like what are the implications of that? And so it does really require a pretty high level of expertise, especially in regards to finances, that the management analyst one would not have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and I think I'll jump in here. One of my questions, and it's just about the structure of your SPCSA, is who oversees the city of Las Vegas, the city of Henderson, or whoever might have another charter? Does that fall under you as well?
Melissa Macadin, for the record. Great question. No, that does not fall under us at all. They are approved to authorize under the Nevada Department of Education. And as authorizers, there are a lot of reports and things that we have to submit to the Nevada Department of Education, and they will be the ones that oversee and look at those reports. And so they'll fall under the Nevada Department of Ed.
Okay. All right. And then I have a couple other questions. So, what factors, other than the addition of the new management analyst position, has the authority considered to provide that equitable workload among supervisory positions? Because I don't think this is totally unusual in, unfortunately, school settings. The school districts all face the same thing. Even our smaller districts may not have enough people to oversee schools, right, that they have because they have a smaller staff. So can you address that?
Sure. So, Melissa Macadin, for the record, thank you, Chair Dondera Loop. That management analyst 4 position, it oversees not only the organizational performance framework, which is huge, but it also oversees charter school amendment requests. So the more charter schools you have, the more amendment requests you have, right? We don't want charter schools just going out willy-nilly making decisions. Statute is very clear, they have to come to us and get permission. So that's a major workload. It also oversees all the renewal applications. And so every time a charter school has to be renewed, there's a major evaluation that has to take place, a report that has to be written, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really, it's true, it creates equity between our financial oversight team and our operational oversight team, but it's just also about the sheer volume and amount of work that happens when more schools equals more amendments, more renewals, and more complex and unique diversification required.
Yeah, welcome to the world of education.
Yep.
So can you also, for me, provide an overview of the authority's Medicaid billing initiative and the anticipated impact that would have on the charter schools and their pupils?
I'm going to let Ms. Bauer take this one.
Jennifer Bauer, Director of Finance and Operations for the record. So the Medicaid billing services, or Medicaid Services Billing Initiative is new to the charter school environment in Nevada. Currently, charter schools are not able to submit Medicaid claims for school health services provided in the school health setting. Previously, Nevada Medicaid allowed for Medicaid claims payments for services provided to students with disabilities. Now there are Medicaid claims eligible reimbursements for all services in the school health setting. So we want to capture this funding for our schools, just like districts do currently. This is a new initiative, as I indicated. It's a large and logistical issue that we are trying to navigate with the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy because, as they have decided in their state plan amendment, LEAs are the responsible entity for submitting Medicaid claims for the school health services for Medicaid eligible students. As the LEA, the SPCSA must submit those claims on behalf of schools. We are currently in process of determining how to do that most efficiently. We have received provider enrollment status through the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy, so that was a big win for our agency. Our next steps, we're partnering with Medicaid and the State Purchasing Division to procure a contract service for the electronic health record system that's necessary to log all the information and for a billing agent service so that we can ensure that all the claims have all the required information and are submitted to the Medicaid third-party administrator, Gainwell, so that we can receive that payment. It will come back to the SPCSA, then we will disperse those funds to the schools based on the claims submitted. As I'm sure you can imagine, this is not easy. This is something we're all learning together how to implement, and we do currently have a contracted temporary employee assisting us with that work. This position that we have requested in the budget before you would convert the contracted temporary employee to a permanent employee to not only work through the logistics of implementing this initiative, but also maintain the daily operations of that work when it's implemented and monitor the vendor's performance to ensure that we are maximizing our funds paid out for that vendor.
Thank you. And I know the governor's office did not submit, I don't believe, on this, but I'm just not clear why the position would be needed to implement something that's not we don't know the impact of the workload yet. So that's why I was asking that question. So thank you very much, and I will go on to Chair Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you've kind of asked what I was going to ask. You've indicated that you're planning to contract with a vendor for the electronic healthcare records, the system that you need, and a billing agent to service that. But as the chair stated, it was not included in the governor's recommended budget as it was presented to us. So could you explain a little bit more of why the management analyst position is recommended now when the authority, you guys have indicated that the position is not required to implement the Medicaid billing system, and the workload impact to you would not be known until a potential new system is implemented, and we don't have that system as of yet.
Jennifer Bauer for the record. There is a workload impact right now. We could not do this work. We could not even work with the schools, the potential vendors, and the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy if we did not have this contracted temporary position. So there is a significant workload impact now. And logistically, there will continue to be an impact on the workload to implement this system. Not only do we need an individual dedicated to this work full-time to ensure that the schools are supported, to ensure that the schools have what they need and are prepared to begin submitting claims, but also that we at the LEA level know what our responsibilities are, and that also at the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy, what they need to do to support us, because we are not a district yet in LEA. So the funding was not requested in the governor's requested budget because we just are working through all of the logistics. We didn't know at the time what this impact would be financially. We are considering the most economical means to implement, so we're looking at a slow rollout. We're starting with 3 schools that have done this in other states where their charter management organizations, education management organizations are prepared to support them. And we will be submitting, at risk of going against the governor's finance office, a request to the April Interim Finance Committee for some initial funding to transfer from reserves to start this slow rollout with 3 schools. Once we have that and we know we can do it successfully for those 3 schools, then we will phase in other schools on an opt-in approach, and we will go full implementation hopefully within a year, and that position that we are requesting in our budget will be integral to that work.
Follow-up? Yes. Thank you. So could you tell us what the estimated cost would be for the rollout and then the ongoing expenses, since you're going to be coming before the IFC in April? What is that estimated rollout cost and that ongoing cost?
Jennifer Bauer for the record. Speaking a little bit with a crystal ball here, the preliminary vendor quote we have received, which seems to be the front runner for the most quality services that schools can receive and we can receive, looks like about $10,000 per school, and an initial implementation of $18,000 for the SPCSA. Then we would add schools at that rate. Hopefully the vendor doesn't change the rate on us. Hopefully we can get past the state purchasing division's requirements to join a current school district's contract, and we can move forward with that work before the end of this fiscal year. So preliminarily, those are the numbers I have: 10 per school and about 18 for SPCSA LEA-wide implementation. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it leads to another one. If the management analyst position is not approved to be implemented for the Medicaid billing initiative, how do you plan to implement the initiative with the existing resources that you already have?
Jennifer Bauer for the record again. We would need to continue the assignment of our current contracted temporary employment dedicated to this work.
Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you very much. And next is Assemblymember Torres Fawcett.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the presentation, all that you do to support school leaders as well. Can you discuss how the new education programs professional would assist in some of the workload associated with supporting charter schools, specifically their special ed programs and services? And then what challenges the authority has experienced with meeting its current workload with the 2 existing positions?
Melissa McAdin for the record. Great question. I feel like I could talk about this for 30 minutes. So I won't. I'll try to be a little more succinct than that. But I think anyone who has been around education at all understands that special education, not only is the law incredibly complex, but it also tends to be a very litigious area of education. And so as our student special education population has increased, obviously so have the rate of our informal complaints, formal state complaints, and due process complaints. And as the LEA, we are 100% all in on overseeing that process and dealing with that process. And what that sort of leads to is a very reactionary scenario. So let's just play this out, right? We get a state complaint about one of our schools. We dig into it. We see, oh my gosh, they're a relatively new school. They have a new special education director. And so what do? We come in and we say, okay, listen, you messed up. We got to provide training, right? And that's reactionary training, which would have been better is if we had the staff on the front end to say, hey, every fall, we provide a training for all special education directors in the SPCSA so we can avoid some of these pitfalls, right? So we just essentially have not been able to proactively service our schools. With this additional position, we would be able to do on-site monitoring to ensure, implementation of IDEA, implementation of IEPs. We would be able to monitor IEPs informally on the front end so that we ensure that schools are following all the federal laws. We would be able to, meet their needs. So I think everyone understands that charter schools are filled via a lottery, right? And when I was running a charter school, we had a lottery, and we lotteried in a student who had Down syndrome, and his IEP required a self-contained classroom. We didn't have a self-contained classroom. We had to create one. And there was no one for me to call to get help on what's the best way to do this? Is there anyone at the SPCSA who can help us roll this out so that we make sure, we're providing the best services we can to this student? So it's those sort of unique challenges that come to charter schools that they need support with that we have a really hard time staying on top of at this ratio of staff to special ed students.
Thank you for that. And I kind of want to switch gears a little bit to talk about MTSS or the multi-tiered systems of support. Would the authority be able to provide sufficient support to assist the sponsored schools with the implementation of MTSS with a staffing ratio of 1 education programs professional per 11.5 schools? And what would that look like?
Melissa McAdam, for the record, great question. So we are, by most LEA standards, operating a very lean operation here, right? And we, as I said, we know what the ratios are and we know we're above that. We're operating under that right now, and we do believe that we can maintain that level of support, assuming that the number of schools that join and opt in to one of our cohorts remains steady at about 4 or 5 a year. Now, should that number skyrocket and 10 schools want to join a cohort, right, we might have some problems on our hand and come crawling back in the interim. But historically, that is the number that have joined each year. And yes, it's tight, and of course, more people are always better, but we feel like we can get the job done with the 2 that we have because they're so experienced. They've been with us through that grant funding, and they really have it dialed in.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We will go to Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my questions are around the education programs professional. How are the monitoring responsibilities divided between the Department of Education and the authority?
Melissa McAdam, for the record, are you speaking specifically to the one that would work on school performance plans and career and technical education?
I believe that it's assessment and accountability and also the advanced monitoring for career technical. It's both.
Okay, yes. Well, thank you for that question, Melissa McAdam, for the record. So as the LEA, it is our responsibility to oversee the school performance plans. Every school has to do a school performance plan, and the LEA is responsible for overseeing and making sure that those are, first of all, they're providing technical training that schools know how to use the platform that the SEA, the Nevada Department of Education, has mandated that they be used. So there's technical training. Then they're doing things like making sure that they're using SMART goals, that they're using evidence-based approaches that are going to lead to the best student outcomes if implemented correctly. So it really is the LEA's responsibility to do that. And then the SEA, the Nevada Department of Education, of course, they're looking at those, but on a much higher level. They don't necessarily provide that level of technical support and, send it. We do some back and forth, like, hey, look, these aren't SMART goals. You need to fix this. Or, hey, we require that you have a goal related to special education and it's not here. Get a special ed goal in here, right? And that level of oversight is the responsibility of the LEA. The other major function of that position would be overseeing career and technical education. I think everyone knows CTE is a major initiative in the state of Nevada. And historically, the Nevada Department of Education has allowed a couple of our bigger systems who have the bandwidth to apply for the Carl Perkins money that helps fund CTE programs. But they have come back and said, no more. It's the LEA who has to apply. And in order to apply for that money, there's something called yes, a comprehensive local needs assessment. And the LEA is responsible for doing that. And we just don't have anyone who can do that or is doing that. And so without that, our schools will lose their funding that they need for their CTE programs, if that makes sense.
It does, Madam Chair, to follow up. So I just have a quick question. What's the system that you're mandated to put your data into now that NDE has?
Melissa Mackinnon, for the record, I honestly cannot remember what it is called, but there's a platform that they use that we have to submit our school performance plans in. I honestly don't remember the name of it. I apologize. I could get that for you. But all schools have to use that system to upload their school performance plans.
Okay. So the follow-up to your response is, do you think that the Department of Education can offer some additional monitoring support to cover the extra 2 hours of work that's currently being handled by the education programs professional rather than creating a new position?
Melissa Mackinnon, for the record. So, I obviously would never, thank you for that question, Senator Neal. I would never be so bold as to speak for NDE, but what I do know is that NDE is severely understaffed, and I don't believe there's anyone who has additional capacity. It's also the ongoing monitoring of those reports. We want to be able to say there's built-in check-ins in the system where the schools should be reporting to their board, how are we doing, what's our progress towards these goals, and we want to be able to monitor that more closely than what we can do now. So it's an ongoing work monitoring these plans and progress towards goals throughout the year. And I guess I will be so bold as to say that I do not believe anyone at NDE has the bandwidth to take on what is the LEA responsibility.
Did you have a follow-up?
I do,
Senator?
Madam Chair. Can I? So I have a question that's kind of in this vein of this education programs professional. So it's been a long-standing, policy that it's not new that you guys should focus on the underperforming students who happen to fall in the lower ranking. And so it's come to my attention on a couple of fronts. How are we managing issues like 100 Academy that has a consistent underperformance, and they actually have like 78% of their students emerging development? Democracy Prep, literally their education, their elementary just dropped super low. We're not talking about whether or not the agency that's over that school should be there because it's been consistent. It flips from the high school to the elementary to the middle school. And so at the end of the day, right, there's these conversations that equity in terms of how we're applying support services dollars are not equal even in the charter school ranking. And so what are we doing, right?
Melissa, thank you. Let me just circle back and say that program is called Plan for Learning. That's what it's called. So that's cross that off my list. But thank you for your question, Senator Neal, because it is a very important question, and frankly, it is the whole heart and soul of the charter sector. So what I think is really important to note is that charter schools, on top of the NSPF, of course, we get their ratings, but we also do a more in-depth analysis using a separate academic performance framework. And when those schools are not meeting standards, they enter an intervention ladder. And the first step is a notice of concern. The second, and when you have a notice of concern, that means you're no longer in good standing. So that school, let's just take Democracy Prep since you named it, right? I can't address 100 Academy because they're Clark County school, and until next year, they've never been under our purview, so I don't have the history there. But since you named Democracy Prep, we'll use them as an example. Democracy Prep has a notice of concern because they have poor performance. Democracy Prep wants to come to us, this is hypothetical, they come to us and they want to add more students. Absolutely not. I'm sorry, you have a notice of concern. There is no scenario where we are going to be recommending that you can add more students. Start doing right by the students you have in seats right now. What is also really, really important to know, which you will start to see playing out probably next year, is that if charter schools get a 1-star rating 3 times in a 5-year period, the language says that charter contract shall be terminated. We have schools facing that, and frankly, just my opinion, they should be terminated. Like, that's the charter bargain. You got a charter because you said you could do right by these kids, you could close the achievement gap, and these kids would be meeting standards. And if you can't do that, then it's time to get out of the game and let other people come in who can. That's kind of my personal opinion on it, but the law supports it, right? There is an automatic closure law in Nevada, and there are schools that if they get 1 star in the next 3 years, their contract will be terminated.
I think I appreciate that statement. I think you're missing my point that I don't believe that the proper supports exist to help those students, and it's been long-standing and ongoing. Democracy Prep holds the kids there for 5 days a week, half day on Wednesday. So they've had a model of 8 to 4, and there's no gains. So when do we say, hey, model's not working, you've had the model for 6 years, you're not making the kids smarter by keeping them there 5 days, 8 to 5, and there have been no academic gains. There's no conversation, right? You can punish someone all day, but if the children are like, the system itself is not supporting what's going on, like the parents are lost, and anyway, we'll talk about it offline. I just feel like there should be more done rather than saying, yes, they should probably cease to exist, but there are other conversations that have been going on, and nobody has pulled their collar and said, maybe this model that you're putting on these children is actually not changing the game.
Melissa McAdam, for the record. Thank you, Senator Neal. Certainly happy to talk to you more about that offline. I do think it's important to recognize that the role of the authority is to provide, with like some of these positions, right? Like, we can go in and say, this is what's best practice regarding students with IEPs. This is what's best practice regarding English language learner students. But ultimately, it is that school's board. Our role is not to go in and say, this curriculum isn't working, get rid of it, or this bell schedule isn't working, this is nonsense. It's ultimately that individual charter school's board's responsibility to determine what changes they're going to make, and we just hold them accountable for doing that, essentially.
Okay, thank you. I have one follow-up just to that. How many schools do you have on notice of concern?
Melissa Mackinnon, they can be on a notice of concern for the academic framework. They could be on a notice of concern for financial, and they could be on a notice of concern for organization as well. I don't have those numbers in my head, but I can certainly get you those for all three categories.
Okay, thank you. And we will go to Senator Canizaro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. I want to talk a little bit about the Infinite Campus data system. Can you talk to us a little bit about the impacts of charter schools not being able to effectively utilize the Infinite Campus data system, and how your new proposed educational programs professional position would minimize those impacts, and just what you would expect to see from that?
Thank you for that question, Senator Canizaro. Melissa Mackinnon for the record. Absolutely. It starts right at the very beginning when a student enrolls. There are enrollment codes, and when they withdraw, there are withdrawal codes. And that certainly is, I don't want to call it a moving target, but it's updated, right? As NDE learns more and there's best practices, those things are updated. So for example, if a charter school is inaccurately using a withdrawal code, you think, well, what's the big deal? Well, it becomes a big deal on the average daily enrollment report, which is how the funding comes out, and it becomes a problem because now a student looks like it's enrolled, at a charter school and Clark County, right? And then ultimately it affects NDE's caseload and workload, because that can have an impact on the pupil enrollment and attendance audits that they do. And then they have to true that all up, right? So we need these schools to be utilizing these codes accurately. Additionally, as I mentioned, chronic absenteeism, again, it seems like pretty straightforward. A kid's in school, they're not in school. It's not. There's a gazillion different codes. There's rules around them. They update the business rules, and we need to stay on top of that to ensure schools are doing that correctly. And then, of course, everyone's favorite topic, grad score, right? We know that the grad score is looking at, I don't know, I've heard 50 metrics, I've heard 72, whatever it is. It's a lot of different metrics, all within Infinite Campus, to determine a student's eligibility as at risk. And if a charter school isn't utilizing the system correctly, it could impact their funding. So just one example is, we know one of the things that grad score looks at is visits to the nurse's office. I mean, we don't even know if all of our charter schools know how to use that. Infinite Campus is a massive machine with a lot of capabilities, but it is about as intuitive as it is. There's zero intuitiveness about that program. So, we need to be able to train our schools. So like, hey, this is how you use the health section of this. You need to be documenting, not just on a piece of paper somewhere, like within Infinite Campus when a student comes to the nurse, because this is affecting your grad score. This is affecting your ability to get at-risk funding. And right now, we just simply do not have anyone to help the schools, train the schools. And so it impacts both us and the Nevada Department of Ed when they don't do it correctly.
Okay, I have another question as well, and I think your answer is actually giving me some additional things I want to ask about. But first, can you talk to us a little bit about why one education program's professional position could not be responsible for both supporting the multi-tiered systems of support implementation and the tasks associated with the school performance plans under the Every Student Succeeds Act?
Sure. Melissa, thank you for that question, Senator Canizaro. Melissa Mackinnon for the record. So currently, right now, we have 2 individuals grant funded who oversee that MTSS work, and their ratio is already twice what UNR, who is supporting the state on that work, recommends. So they're maxed out bandwidth-wise and capacity-wise. So we have enough schools participating in MTSS, and we have about 4 to 5 schools each year who join an additional cohort. And so that just requires that many people to do it. The school support and CTE position, again, like a similarly sized LEA has multiple people doing CTE and multiple people doing school support, right? So that position, to combined, even combining school support and CTE is a lot for one person. So each project in its own is a massive lift and requires a body to do it.
Okay, so it's your position that one of those positions could not do both of those things.
Melissa Mackin, for the record, correct.
I want to ask a couple of questions about, I think, sort of in connection with what Assemblymember Backus brought up earlier, and then I think maybe it plays into the Infinite Campus piece as well. When we were looking at some of the numbers for students, you mentioned that this is all based upon the October count day is where that information comes from. So do you do any follow-up to gather data on those students to sort of see if they're staying in those charter schools through the end of the year, if they're coming back for that next school year? Are you tracking any of that, or are we just relying on the numbers that come in that October set? And if anything, for example, if you have certain students with IEPs, are you following to make sure that that student stayed at that charter school and, was still on that IEP, and to what extent that is sort of their IEP is being addressed, or if they were asked to leave that charter school or went to a different charter school or decided to go back to the school district? Do you keep or track any of that data?
Melissa Mackin, for the record, that's a great question. We really don't necessarily track it on an individual student level. We track, year over year, how many kids do we have enrolled within the SPCSA who also qualify for an individual education plan. Certainly, I think some schools do a better job of keeping, following that student all the way through. That's not to say we couldn't do that, but we don't currently track on an individual level to see, how long, do they start in kindergarten and finish at, 8th grade at the same charter school. We don't have that data right now.
Okay. And I think then similarly, you wouldn't have additional data on those students that you may identify as needing some sort of additional help, who either stay in that charter school or then maybe leave and go somewhere else.
Melissa Mackin, for the record, we have a lot of data on the students that are in the seats. I mean, for example, we know that in every student on an IEP in both English language arts, math, science, and ACT is more proficient in a charter school than a traditional school. So we have a lot of data on the students who have IEPs within our system, but as far as tracking the trajectory of each individual student, we don't have that.
And then that number that you get from count day, you aren't going later in the year and looking to see if that matches. You're just relying on that from that October date every year.
Melissa Mackin, for the record, we do informally, right? Because I think as everybody knows, count day, when you're being paid for special education, you're being paid for last year's count day in October. So we do kind of keep an eye on it because we see the number of special education students in charter schools increasing. And so we are informally sort of tracking at the beginning of the year, there were 6,300. Now there's 6,400, right? So for informal reasons and as things come up, but as far as having a table that shows month to month, we could easily pull that data, but we don't have it readily right here, right now.
Is there anything about that Infinite Campus that would be able to assist you if you're able to better manage that data to get some of these answers?
Melissa Mackin, for the record, thank you, Senator Cannizzaro. That's actually something I didn't say that was pretty massively important is that there is a lot of capabilities of information we could pull out of Infinite Campus if we had someone dedicated to doing it. It would also lighten the burden of schools, right? Like there are certain reports that they have to do and they have to go into Infinite Campus, whereas if we had, and pull it themselves, whereas if we had someone, we could create what they call a canned report, and each school leader would just kind of have to push a button and it would automatically run that report. It would save them a lot of time, but for sure we would be able to access data much quicker on a much regular basis, than we currently can.
You mentioned that some of the schools are collecting some of that data. So is there anything that you have that would require those schools to send that compiled data to you all, or that's just something they do individually at each school and you have no oversight or requirements of the schools?
Melissa Mackin, for the record, yeah, we do not collect any of you're speaking specifically of the through data, like how long does a student stay enrolled if
Yeah,
they're.
because you
Yeah.
mentioned that some of the schools
Yeah.
are collecting that data.
Yeah, certainly, Melissa Mackin, for the record, we don't collect it. We don't have it.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Assemblymember Yeager.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here this morning. I just had a couple of questions. One was a clarifying question on one of your slides. You talked about the anticipated growth in the next year, and I think you said you were taking on 5 charter schools from Clark County School District, but I noted in the footnote it said 6, so I just wanted to ask if it was 5 or 6 that you're
I'm
taking
sorry.
on.
Thank you, Speaker Yeager. Melissa Mackin, for the record, there's 6 Clark County charter schools, sorry.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure. And then, Madam Chair, if I could ask one more question, please. I wanted to ask about the grants and project analyst positions, and my question there was whether you believe that the 2 positions would be sufficient to meet the current and anticipated workload associated with grant administration over the 25-27 biennium.
Jennifer Bauer, Director of Finance and Operations, for the record. You're asking me for my crystal ball again. Happy to do my best. You're probably looking at some statistics that indicate there is technically a 3rd position needed, which is a fair question. What we do at the SPCSA with our asks is we take a conservative approach. So we think conservatively 2 positions would be sufficient because we are doing that work right now with 2 contracted temporary positions. We also are going to be leveraging additional efficiency opportunities. The new site evaluation, monitoring and evaluation team led by the proposed education programs director would be one of those efficiency opportunities. By maximizing the efforts and the workload that go into site evaluations and grant monitoring, we think that can ease hopefully some of the burden on the existing grants and projects analysts. And so we are optimistic that 4 can continue to do the work. But I believe, as Executive Director McAdam indicated earlier, if we get an onslaught of more schools or some more grants coming our way, we might reserve the right to come back before the Interim Finance Committee at some point to ask for that additional position, but we think 4 can do it.
Great, thank you for that response. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I believe Senator Buck has a question.
Thank you, Chair. On the vein of Medicaid reimbursement, so it's to support special populations, can you give an example of different services? So behavior mentors, school psychologists, nursing services, and who would get the funding for that? It goes back to the schools, I'm assuming?
Jennifer Bauer, Director of Finance and Operations. I happen to have this handy Medicaid manual that the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy wrote last year that does in fact have some examples of eligible services for Medicaid eligible students. And you touched on, Senator Buck, some exact examples. Speech therapy, language disorders, audiology services, occupational therapy, applied behavioral analysis, personal care services, case management, dental, optometry, non-residential mental health rehabilitative services. And the list is longer. It even includes durable medical equipment. So there are a lot of services in the school setting that Medicaid eligible students can and should receive that those schools are not being reimbursed for. And so when we are able to submit those claims to Medicaid and we are reimbursed by their Medicaid administrator, then we can pass those funds directly back to the schools to maximize their budget for that service.
If I may, Chair. Also, as far as amendment requests, so thinking of workload and that you sort of are an organization that self-funds through the income that you bring in or revenue you bring in from the schools, and this 1.25%. So does staff or do you know, in looking at district schools, so CCSD, Washoe County district schools, I know that in comparing budgets from the school level, they're giving 20 to 45% to the districts to do business or be the LEA or the district. So I was wondering if staff could get me that, like an average example of that for Washoe County CCSD school budgets, and how much is actually not going to kids in the school, unlike at the State Public Charter School Authority that is getting a meek 1.25%. As far as workload goes, what are some examples of amendment requests that you have gotten in which, say, a one or two star are unable to move forward on?
Melissa Mackinnon for the record. So a 1 or 2 star school, they're not able to, like, for example, add a new campus. They wouldn't even be able to add additional grades. Let's say they were like K-5 and they wanted to add middle school. No. Let's say they're K-5, but they just want to, they have 400 kids and they want to make it 600. No. So any growth of any kind is an absolutely not. Additionally, they are considered not in good standing, so it actually can affect like things like their funding, their ability to go out and like get funding, go to the bond market, get a loan, right? All of those things can be impacted. So those aren't necessarily amendment requests that we would say no to, right? But if they tried to go to a bank or a funder and get additional funding and they didn't have a strong academic record, they wouldn't be eligible for that funding.
So I challenge this committee and committees in the future that we have schools in Clark County School District and Washoe County that have sat at 1 stars for over 10 years, and there's not the governance or authority to impact change. And inevitably, the State Public Charter School Authority, with their 1.25%, seems to be handling business and keeping those schools in check that are 1 and 2 stars and failing kids year after year.
Thank you very much. And that may be true, but I don't think it is. But I'll just put on the record that we are talking about charter schools, not public schools right now. So we are being told that there's no money to do those things. So if I'm inaccurate, please correct me, but I believe that's what I understood. All right. Are there any other comments, questions from the committee? Senator Canizaro, I see a puzzled look on your face. Do you have a question?
Yeah, not puzzled. I think I wanted to be clear about some of the Medicaid pieces, given the questions that were just asked, because I think where this committee had some concerns in the discussion today is that system is not included in the governor's recommended budget. We are expecting to see some potential work program that is coming forward that may help to put that into place. But it's tough to say today that we are going to approve that, not because those services are not important, but because there is some fundamental, I think, groundwork that has to be laid that is not currently included in governor's recommended budget that potentially may occur during the course of this legislative session. And so that is sort of where we're trying to figure out what does that look like going forward. And this might be more of a comment, Madam Chair, than really a question, just as we're going through some of these things. because I don't think that anybody thinks that kids should not have access to services within the schools. But your ability to be able to implement and to process Medicaid payments is also restricted by the availability of a system and personnel in which to do that, and a plan in which to do that, which we do not have in this governor's recommended budget, that we may see at a work program for IFC, and that we will have to make decisions about in connection with that piece of it. And I see lots of head shaking yes. So I think I have gotten that piece right, where this committee's concern is with respect to that particular issue.
Thank you very much. And I would just say that we need to all remember that this is about the kids. It's not about the, it's about kids getting a fair education. And as I always say, with public money comes public accountability, and it doesn't matter what system you're in. So if, parents make decisions about how they want to educate their children, but the rules need to be remain standardized so that kids get the benefit, because the adults are making the rules, and we need to make sure that the kids don't have to suffer consequences. So that's where I am as an educator. That's where I am as a parent, a grandparent, and as a member of this committee and this body. All right, if there are not any other, I almost elevated you. Assembly Member Yeager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the risk of going off the rails this morning, I did want to ask just one quick question, and hopefully it's not too difficult of one, but we're all watching very closely what's happening at the federal level, particularly with the Department of Education and the proposed cuts. And I just wondered if you guys have any sort of information about, it's all fluid, but I do believe we're going to see cuts of some sort made, or maybe the whole department's going to go away, and that has a huge impact on our budget. But if you could just speak to what you're trying to do to get ahead of that, whether that's working with NDE, whether you have your own contingency plan, because that's obviously a huge concern. So thanks for the opportunity to ask that, Madam Chair.
Melissa Mackinnon, for the record. Of course, thank you for that question. Of course, it's on the front of everyone's mind in education, and certainly it is true that charter schools is just as impacted as traditional schools if things like IDEA funding were decreased, Title I funding, those being the two biggest pots of money. There's others, of course, but certainly our charter schools will be impacted. Now, what we're doing about it, I think we're staying in constant communication with NDE, having regular check-in calls with them, having regular check-in calls with the governor, communicating with them what our priorities are so that they can communicate those. So certainly we anticipate, charter schools are going to feel that just as much as traditional schools are. And yeah, we're all just kind of holding our breath. Jennifer?
Jennifer Bauer, for the record. To expand upon that, Executive Director Mackinnon is correct. We are working with the Governor's Office, the Governor's Finance Office, and the Department of Education on anything that they're aware of. But we are directly impacted, as Melissa indicated. So we are taking it upon ourselves at the SPCSA to also be proactive and work with some agencies that are on Capitol Hill and are connected in DC. So we're working with a law firm called the Brewman Group, who is a foremost expert in the field of education funding. We are also working with NGMA, the Nevada National Grant Management Association. We're sending staff to those webinars and conferences, and so we're trying to make sure that we are protecting our agency and our schools with as much outreach and connection as we can.
And Madam Chair, could I just make a quick comment? Obviously, this is a fluid situation, but I think you understand why, as we're in the legislative session, this is particularly important to us, having to figure out this budget, not just in public education, but in all sectors where we rely on public funding. So my request of you would just be to try to keep us in the loop and our fiscal staff as much as you can. I mean, we've reached out to the governor's office as well, and we're trying to keep tabs on this. But I just want to make sure that that communication is very robust so we can get ahead of this. What I don't want to have happen and what I fear could happen is we end up, later in the year after the legislative session, having to come back in a special session to address what could be really massive and really devastating cuts to our budget. So anything we can do to mitigate that, we want to do that. So just please don't assume that we have the latest and greatest information. And if you could share that with us, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And not seeing any other questions or comments, we will close the budget hearing on budget account 2711 for the State Public Charter School Authority. And we will go to our last agenda item for the day, public comment. For those of you providing public comment, please remember to state and spell your name. We'll start here in Carson City. I do not believe we got a connection to Las Vegas, so we'll be online. And if you are calling in online, please dial 888-475-4499. And when prompted to provide the meeting ID, please enter 869-9559-4930 and press pound. When prompted for the participant ID, please press pound. So I'll begin here in Carson City, and then we'll move to the phone lines. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair. For the record, I am Brian Wallace, BrianWallace, Vice President of the Nevada State Education Association. The Nevada State Education Association has been the voice of Nevada educators for 125 years. NSCA is concerned about the fast-growing budget of the State Public Charter School Authority and schools under their purview. Since 2017, NSCA has been asking for greater control and oversight of charter schools, especially given that separate and unequal dynamics between charter schools and neighborhood public schools. In 2019, NSCA sponsored and the Committee on Education introduced AB 462, a proposed moratorium on new charter schools in Nevada. In a political compromise, the legislature amended AB 462 to require the Charter School Authority to develop and implement a growth management plan. However, since its passage, the growth in charter schools has been supercharged. Since the spring of 2019, charter schools have grown by over 25,000 students, or 57%. In that same time, district schools have lost over 40,000 students, and about 9%. The Charter School Authority is now the second largest school district in the state. It's clear the Charter School Authority has not honored the legislative intent behind AB 462 to manage charter growth. This was glaringly apparent last year when the Charter School Authority approved a 1,400-student school right next door to Alice Smith Elementary School, a Washoe County school at 72% capacity. Washoe has indicated this action will force the closure of at least one elementary school. Meanwhile, NSCA has advocated to level the playing field between charters and neighborhood public schools. While the legislature has taken some action over the years, there remain fundamental inequities. For example, 100% of full-time teachers at traditional public schools are required to be fully licensed. This is not true for our charters. When a student leaves a neighborhood school for a charter school, the public funding for that student goes with them, but the neighborhood school's overhead costs remain. Charter schools can exacerbate existing inequities by creating barriers to entry for vulnerable students. This could be as simple as students with the greatest support self-selecting into charters, effectively siphoning away students with the most engaged parents, leaving students with greater needs and fewer resources at our public schools. Charter schools are much quicker to expel students with behavior problems and/or other issues, sending these students back to the neighborhood public schools. This has created a two-tiered system of public education. While the Charter Authority has worked on the inequities in their student population, charters educate a significantly lower percentage of students with IEPs, students who are low income, and are English language learners. NSCA encourages the committee to continue asking these tough questions and continue to demand greater accountability from the SPCSA. Thank you for your time, committee.
Thank you very much. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Robert Munson, RobertMunson, and I'm with the Nevada State Education Association. I am also the Vice President of the Washoe Education Association. In Washoe County, we are really concerned about the expansion of for-profit charter schools that have less oversight and fewer requirements, such as employing teachers that are not necessarily fully licensed or highly qualified. We are not against charter schools. We believe that some charter schools fill a niche, such as the ACE Charter School, Mariposa, and others. However, for-profit charter schools drain resources from not only our students and our state, but from the kids that we service. Building a K-12 charter school immediately adjacent to an already existing elementary school that's at 72% of capacity and is just down the road from a high school, as well as a newly built middle school, is going to close at least one elementary school and significantly impact the other schools' abilities to service their students. It'll also draw students from, the district is making a significant investment into infrastructure, having just built this new middle school, building a technical school as well that will service many students in this area. One of the other concerns that we have is that fewer students with IEPs attend charter schools, and many of the charter schools select their students, which impacts the number of students with IEPs and English language learners at our public schools. With fewer resources, it is more difficult to service these students effectively. AB 462 was designed and intended to help manage charter school growth, but we see an explosion both in Clark County and in Washoe County of charter schools. And again, these are being built right next to and adjacent to schools, meant to compete with schools rather than help to complement and provide niche services that maybe public schools do not provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any additional public comment here in Carson City? And I do not believe we have Las Vegas online, so we will go to the phone lines. BPS, when you're ready. BPS, are you on the line? Do you hear us?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers to provide public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, with that, this completes our agenda today. I'd like to thank everyone for being here for the first meeting. And tomorrow morning, we'll be back in joint subcommittee meetings starting at 8 a.m. So with that, this meeting is adjourned.